Welcome to the IRET Radio videocast podcast show. Tuesday the 26th of January. We're getting through the year. My name's Stuart Lockhead. Sitting with me today, the regular crew. I've got Jimmy Hutton. Hi, Jimmy.
All right, mate.
Got Phil Attridge. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Stuart.
And the gaffer himself, Norrie Stewart. Hi, Norrie.
Hi, Stuart.
Today we're waiting for the press briefing, but we're not going to get a press briefing. There will be a COVID announcement in the chamber by John Swinney, so we won't be giving you any COVID news. However, we will start with a story about a vaccine and the problems that the EU is recognising, and we could be suffering as well from it. Alistair Jack, the Secretary of State for goodness knows where, has written a piece in the Irish Times. His excuse for writing it was that it was Burns Day yesterday. Hugo Rifkin, son of Malky, who was a reasonable Tory, as far as I recall. He's got a piece in the Times. We might have a go at that. The Scotsman in the Evening News, we're all concerned that they might be moving to the centre instead of being arch unionists now that the ownership has changed. And a wee shout out to Craig Murray, who's in court tomorrow, a political trial for his life, no, for his liberty. Right, who would like to get, Jimmy, you were the first person to bring up the vaccine problems. Tell us about it.
This is a story that's just going to keep growing legs this week, I reckon. The EU are fizzing because they've been screwed over. They paid for 80 million doses of the vaccine to be delivered by mid-March, and it appears that they're going to get around 30 million. AstraZeneca are blaming problems at their plant in Belgium, production problems, but I can understand why the EU are fizzing. There you go, Big Pharma, Pfizer as well. They've signed massive contracts, taken huge amounts of money up front, and aren't going to deliver on their contracts. Now, at the same time as all this, we're looking at smaller companies who can't get approval for their vaccines, like say Valnova or Valnova or whatever they're called in Livingston, who could be producing, well, they reckon they could be producing millions of doses of their vaccine by end of March, April, but it's not been approved yet. But I think the EU are going to play hardball here. Most vaccines are manufactured. Certainly the stuff that we're using for Pfizer and AstraZeneca, it's manufactured in the EU. They're going to play hardball and we're going to lose out. Because the minute, and it's already been mentioned by the German health minister, but the minute that the EU says you need permits to move your vaccine out with the EU, these companies will cave. And it's third countries like us that'll miss out.
Sorry to sound heartless, but we've done this to ourselves, and they're talking about outside the block. Well, that's us now. I mean, it's just, oh, we're still here. I mean, sorry, how many times you got to shoot yourself in the head before you realise you've shot yourself in the head? And the EU would be, the Commission is committed to look after EU citizens. Sorry, folks, we're foreigners. We're all Johnny foreigners. Get used to it, you know?
Norrie?
Is this part of the same problem that was presented to the British government from, I think it was Pfizer, who said they were going to extend their premises or something, which would lead to a drop in production?
Well, they were wanting to expand their production facility. Well, obviously, it's not surprising that they've had to stop production to do that temporarily.
That's what I mean. Is this part of, because it wasn't the EU chasing them. They went to the EU and said, look, we're not going to be able to keep up our end of the bargain.
I think it's more the fact that Big Pharma have got things their own way for so long that they feel they can do what they want. I mean, to take 350 million euros from the European Union, deposit that in your own bank, and then start reneging on your delivery promises, that's brass neck. That's a real brass neck, particularly given that their business relies, not just their vaccine business, but all the drugs that they produce rely on all kinds of paperwork for the EU. They're going to get kicked about the head by the EU, and they will cave to them.
They'll have to now do something about corporatization, because it's every industry. When you get a disaster like that, I mean, just put your ear to the window, you'll hear the flap of the vulture's wings as they come along to buy everything up. Right down to the smaller things. See that guy that has Wetherspoons? He's going around buying up bankrupt bars and that now. This is what these people do. Shouldn't be surprised at it. I just hope the legislators at some point will get round to it. And I would trust the EU Commission, the Commission even, Parliament I would trust a lot more, but it doesn't have the powers to actually at some point do something about this.
Well, given that Boris and his government are banking on public opinion supporting them because they're rushing out this vaccine, what effect is this going to have on public opinion if the supplies suddenly dry up?
Well, they'll blame the EU, mate. They'll blame the EU. My main worry is that at some point they're going to screw over the people in care homes and the over 80s that have already had their first dose by saying, I'm sorry, you can't get a second dose. You're just going to have to stay in until such time as we can get you a second dose. That could be bloody June or July. All these people are meant to get a second dose some of them within the next few weeks.
Well, there's been news out of Israel where they're ahead of everybody else on the basis they did a deal with Pfizer that said they're treating the whole of Israel as a trial before it's run out to some parts of the world. And there are reports that the effectiveness of this vaccine, Pfizer vaccine on one dose is as low as 8%.
Fake news.
But sorry, Phil, on you go.
That's totally fake news.
Mm-hmm.
It's 8% for the over 60 for the over 65s. It's not totally.
They're not doing Palestinians or anybody in. There's millions of people there. It's a whole lot. It's an apartheid vaccine.
Yeah, but okay, that's a different issue, Phil.
Yeah, but Stuart, very few credible people have printed that 8% number. There's a reason for that. Let's just wait till we get the real result rather than the speculation for weirdos and
I agree with you. It's only one report. It looked credible.
There's a political dimension to this. I noticed that the Labour Party are suggesting that Boris is going to get a vaccine bounce in the polls. So
well, there was remember the story that Boris would go for this, rush this vaccine out and then have a sudden election. Not that I believe that, but
well, he's got May council elections coming up.
Well,
so the Labour Party are tweeting about it at the moment. So there's a cock-up with the delivery of the vaccine, even if it's beyond the control of the British government. That'll dent their excuse, the Labour Party's excuse.
Yeah, I would venture to suggest that that's exactly what that is, Norrie. When they're talking about a vaccine bounce, that's the Labour Party doing their damage limitation prior to the elections because they're not going to get a Starmer bounce. And the story will be, why do you have such a shiny, acceptable, right-wing leader of the Labour Party who can't get a bounce in the polls?
Yeah, I just thought politically it would be interesting.
By the way, guys, I went and had a wee butcher's hook around Tinternet. I never realised that AstraZeneca's ICI.
All right.
Did you know that since ICI was broken up, no, really broken up, they've bought up half of bloody Europe's pharma. But AstraZeneca is effectively what ICI used to be. Remember the pride we used to take in ICI and how impressive a figure Sir John Harvey-Jones cut back in the day?
It depends if you ever used to live in Middlesbrough or drive around there. There are huge chemical works there. I remember it would been a blot on the landscape and the pollution.
No, a blot in the landscape when you need vaccines, though, eh?
No, blot in the landscape when you need jobs. Let's be honest, Middlesbrough, it's always been kind of an employment black spot. I'm pretty sure ICI would have had thousands of jobs. They had hundreds of jobs doing the Seafield back in the day, didn't they?
But that's what's happening. These are all multinationals. and they go around picking up these brands. You see it now. They're picking up the brands off the high street there, you know, Jenner's and Debenhams. Nothing to do with it. You get the same industrialized crap from some huge multinational, and everybody still thinks they're going to Jenner's or going to everywhere else. It's just the fewer and fewer corporations owning everything, and fewer people with all the dosh. Yeah.
Yeah, just while you're brought up, I'd like to just chuck my 2 pence in on the Jenner's story. And people who aren't local to Edinburgh might not know that Jenner's is now closing in May. But I'd suggest that it isn't a bad thing, because at the end of the day, Mike Ashley is no longer going to be the owner of Jenner's, and whoever does whatever with that building can he make a bigger balls up than Mike Ashley made by turning Jenner's into a generic House of Fraser store.
Not very long ago, Jenner's was owned by one family,
Yes.
and then they sold out to Fraser's. But it was always interesting. Jenner's was basically a big shed with different shops in it.
It used to be brilliant for menswear back in the day, mate. All the football casuals used to go there for loads of gear.
It was dead posh. I'll give you a funny story. When I first started, this would be about 1974-ish, and I was a conductor. And when you came through Morningside, you know, you can just see them. They're all waiting at the bus stops with their little handbags and their hat. You know, we used to call them some cruel things, and they'd get on the bus. So, and then they had to pay then. You didn't get a free pass, and they Jenner's, and I just used to love going, where's that? And you could see the shock on their face that you didn't know where Jenner's was.
I'll tell you what, mate. Somebody should really write a wee story about you. What a wonderful character that is, eh? Cockney bus conductor on the Morningside route in the 70s. Irvine Welsh really needs to write a wee short story based on that, Phil.
Let's move on, gentlemen. We're getting a bit parochial here.
Mm-hmm.
Alistair Jack, the invisible Secretary of State for Scotland, has written a piece in the Irish Times. And his excuse says, of course, that it was Burns night yesterday. Who's read the Alistair Jack story then?
Well, I read it. It's entitled, what's it entitled? Scotland is better in Britain and Britain is better with Scotland.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, aye, the story makes about as much sense as the bloody title, eh?
Well, totally gobsmacked. What I read, I mean, not exactly what I thought would come out of his mouth, just perfectly what I thought would come out of his mouth. I have no idea why the Irish Times printed it.
Oh, it's obvious to have a laugh at the British establishment. That's what they're doing. But they don't really have to try and make a laugh, because you just put one of these gobshites up and off they are, making total idiots of them. Could anybody name something intelligent to come out of any Tory minister's mouth in the last week? You'll still be sitting here.
Well, look, there is an obvious reason why the Irish Times are pumping this story, because of the Burns night and Alistair Jack, but they are sponsoring a winter festival at which the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, is the main guest, hosted by Fintan O'Toole. And that is this week.
Right.
So it's a bit like punting your new book. Get in Alistair Jack to say something controversial, and there you go.
It's a bit sad when you get such a, I mean, let's be honest, the Tories, Scottish Tories in general, aren't impressive. But Alistair Jack has risen to the serried heights of Secretary of State for Scotland, specifically for being unimpressive. His main talent seems to be able to hide in plain sight.
Well, he is completely stupid, because he says things that immediately make you think how bad the Brexit deal was. Young Scots will now be able to benefit from the recently announced touring scheme. The only reason it immediately makes you think, well, you can't go into the Erasmus scheme, which is far bigger and better.
Yeah.
Stupid thing, you're right.
The Turing scheme, named for a man the British state chemically castrated.
And effectively killed. They effectively killed him with their treatment, aye. But didn't he say that we're going to chuck him on the back of a banknote now that the rest of the world realises what an impressive person he actually was?
I've got a little bit of news just popped up on my screen. Apparently, Stuart McCarthy is saying, my spies inform me you've been casting nasturtiums on my good name. There you go, hot off the press.
Wow.
Just tell him we've just been slagging him off.
That was yesterday's show, was it not?
I hardly think we were slagging him off. We just pointed out he was part of the vigil.
The vigil, that's right.
Smacked his house.
Anyway, you got another shout, Stuart. There you go.
Oh, well, aye. Interestingly, Alistair Jack's article was also printed in one of the Italian newspapers, but the language was far more extreme. He was talking about secessionists and what have you, presumably to try and get the Italian right-wingers on side and have them worry about their north-south divide.
Is this part of Downing Street's, how shall I put it, offensive in Europe to ensure that Scottish independence doesn't get any support?
If it is, it's a piss poor start. I mean, basically you've got a patrician Tory splaining to people in the Republic of Ireland why Scotland shouldn't be independent. That's a mad place to start. It's a mad, actually, it's a ridiculously stupid idea when you say it out loud like that. Tory
It is.
splaining why
But
Scotland.
there is a logic to aiming at Ireland, bearing in mind the threat to Boris's government from this new Biden Democratic presidency. Not just the presidency, it's the Senate and the Congress as well, isn't it? The House of Representatives. So they've got to turn their face to Ireland. And don't forget, if you think about Nicola Sturgeon's politics, they're quite close to Biden's. You know, he's apparently woke, but you know, liberal. She's woke and liberal.
I don't think Scotland will be high on Biden's agenda.
No, but
I don't think anywhere but America.
I'm looking at it from Boris's perspective, and the stories about how a trade deal is that's not going to happen now.
No, they've said that.
Nobody's getting a trade deal with America, mate. They're not going to be. They're going to concentrate and try to sort themselves out. But the first trade deal will be with the EU, and it'll be done through Ireland, because Biden doesn't just consider himself Irish American. He adores the Irish. He considers himself Irish. So
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that Britain, I wouldn't be surprised if a reinforced Good Friday Agreement is the price Boris has to pay for opening trade talks with America.
There's been intimated from America, from Washington, they're not interested in having a trade, you know, any kind of free trade or nice trade deal with Britain until it rejoins the EU.
Well, he's got a lot of ammunition, and he can thank Trump for it, because those tariffs that were put on because of the Boeing fiasco are quite crippling. And all he has to do is basically go back to where we were before that argument at no real cost to America.
Well, I don't know. These are
almost
there are.
anything he wants.
No, that's one of the policies, actions that Trump took that Biden might not reverse.
No, I agree. I'm not saying he will do it, but if he wants anything out of Britain, he's got a couple of lovely big levers there he can pull that are
right.
no real cost to him.
But when you think about the Irish UK relationship, you've got to bear in mind the border down the Irish Sea now, and the consequences of that are becoming more and more apparent. They've got Northern Ireland trucks no longer coming across to Cairnryan and driving on the land bridge. There's an article talking about them turning up at Rosslare now and going to the continent by a direct ferry from the south of Ireland. So people in southwest Scotland are worried about losing trade.
They're all going to lose trade. They're taking ferries off England and putting them into Ireland, England and Scotland, because they're not using them here. They're moving the ferries, the big ferries and everything, and taking them from Irish ports direct to Europe.
Yeah, but I mean, it's actually what people are worried about doesn't matter to this government. The Westminster government is not concerned. They know they've got a storm, possibly a storm for 6 months, a howling gale for the rest of the year, and then it gets normalized. They're not going to solve this. They're going to
Well,
continually.
okay
have
then,
to
Norrie,
find
but you've got, all right, so you've got an economic hit on Stranraer, on that part of southwest Scotland. But you've also got the precedent of a border down the Irish Sea. And when we're attacked about a border between Scotland and England, there's already a border in the Irish Sea inside the UK, and there's even a border to get into Kent.
No, I'm not disagreeing, but I mean, there is no leverage on Johnson at all. He's got his 80-seat majority. He doesn't need Scottish votes, so he doesn't care what happens in Scotland.
Certainly doesn't give a monkeys what happens to the people in the southwest. Doesn't
And
give a.
all-
He absolutely couldn't give up.
Isn't that Alistair Jack's constituency though?
But he doesn't expect to
So
hold it.
what? Why
No,
should
you're
they-
right. I mean, obviously, with an
Look at-
80-seat majority, who cares?
Look at the
eh?
90s. They didn't care when they had no MPs in Scotland. When they had absolutely zero in Major's time, they still didn't give a monkey's fuck about us.
Doesn't matter. There'll be lip service. And as for the south of England, as long as nobody's allowed in from the continent, they don't care either. Not his voters anyway.
What about Hugo? Shall we move on to Hugo Rifkind and his appeal to the United Kingdom to stay united? Who wants to lead on that one, Norrie?
Yeah, well, Hugo Rifkin wrote a piece. I quite like, I put him in, well, I wouldn't put him as high as Massey, but of the unionist writers, he's usually a bit more original. And I think that's what he's attempted to do in this article. What he's suggesting is that Remainers should be staunch unionists now. If you objected to the breaking away from the EU, you should also object to the breakup of the Union. What he fails to point out is that those Remainers would effectively have to support the Brexiteer government that's going to be responsible for impoverishing the country. He just seems to be grasping at any reason at all to be unionist. And I'm afraid being a Remainer isn't a good enough reason.
He also, unfortunately, brought in Brown. He says here,
Yeah.
Brown wrote that the UK is the world's most successful experiment in multinational living.
I'd venture to suggest that the European Union is actually the most successful experiment in multinational living, given the fact that the constituent countries of the EU had spent a couple of hundred years being at war with each other. And
Yeah.
from the moment the EU was set up, there's
Very
never been
good point.
any real problems.
That from Brown's just the usual nauseous Britnat guff, you know what I mean? Just stands there. I mean, it really does. I've heard this before, the most successful social union, and you go, is that right? You ever done the body count? You know, have you ever looked at the poverty? And like Jimmy says, take a trot across to Europe if you want to see. Yeah, they've got their problems, but it's
I'd
ingrained.
like to.
It'll never leave.
I thought Hugo Rifkin's piece was cracking. It's really well written. The guy's, he's got a lovely sense of humour, and I did like when he talked about Gordon Brown being wheeled out to bore us into submission, because when he comes out, he just drones on and on and on till nobody wants to actually talk about it. But I think the best one I've seen, and I must thank @ScaryCath from Twitter, she mentioned last night that Brown was out there talking about Schrodinger's Devo Max, a Devo Max that's already been delivered and is being promised again. And I loved that. So I thought,
Yeah,
thank you, Scary Cat.
I picked up on that myself. Very good point. Why do we need a vow when you've already delivered the vow?
Exactly.
Well,
And a point that somebody at some point really needs to put to Gordon Brown, because as he's got older and more of his brow has become knotted, if you put that point to him, I reckon you could tie that brow in a fucking knot and we could leave him there for a few days in the wind. Hopefully his face would stay like that.
He always comes across as such a miserable son of the manse. I mean,
Yeah.
there's never been a more accurate description, if you're a Scot and understand what that means, than the son of a manse.
I saw a clip on Twitter of him being interviewed where he did, oh, the vow was delivered, and said something about you should have read the small print. I presume in the small print it said, don't believe a word I say.
Yes. The other thing for at the end of Hugo Rifkin's piece, it was basically calling on English Remainers to help save the Union and to love bomb us again. And I think Hugo kind of doesn't get that another campaign of love bombing from English celebrities and English Remainers would make Scotland retch as a country. We would retch and vomit upon the love bombers, I think.
You know, when I read it, I was thinking about a piece of videotape that I came across just the other day, and it's the Saturday before the 2014 referendum, and I filmed it on Princess Street, and they were all, the National Collective were out, and it was called Yestival, and it was all a huge joyous celebration of creatives with stalls, dancing and singing, and I mean the energy with the excitement that was there. And I was thinking when I read this about from Hugo Rifkin, it was a dispiriting business being a Scottish unionist during the referendum. I mean,
I get where he's coming from, because like you just talked about Brune being a son of the manse, they're joyless fun suckers.
Yeah.
That's what unionism is. You want to tie yourself to the last 300 years of Scotland being raped, or people being thrown away. Sorry, the Scottish diaspora is a real thing. There are millions of people of Scottish heritage living all around the planet, and that is mostly because the Union forced them out of their own country. They couldn't afford to stay here. There were no opportunities for them.
well, I mean, and that reminded me, look, watching that Yestival piece on the video, that, you know, the energy and the happiness of the campaign, and it reminded me of the marches, the 2 years of marches with AUOB, and the best one was to go to Galashiels. Now Galashiels is famously unionist, has or Lib Dem country for donkey's years. It got totally invaded by thousands of Yes people, and apart from Gala Day, it was the most exciting day that a Galashiels has ever had. And all their cafes and pubs were full, and everybody was joyous and having a great time. So the impact on a town like Galashiels, you can't measure it.
That's the thing that we need to get across, though. You know, when you're talking about Yestival, anytime you hear a unionist talk about a referendum, they always use the word divisive.
It wasn't
a divisive referendum, a divisive referendum. You had families fighting each other. That was not my experience in 2013, 2014. It was a politically engaged electorate. Sure, we might have disagreed, but I didn't remember it being massively divisive. This is a narrative that they've pushed ever since. And frankly, any referendum, by its nature, is bound to be divisive. It's two opposing points.
Well, look,
but I think that we dealt with it in a way that they just do not recognise.
Well, I'm going to give you some more evidence on that. When we were on referendum day, I drove around with Alec Grant in the car with the bullhorn, and we drove around the likes of Granton, Pennywell Road, round there, and there were street stalls stuck up with with saltires and people playing music and dancing on the street. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it before in the schemes.
Yeah, it's taking you back. I mean, as I say, it's been portrayed ever since by those who won the referendum vote as something that almost destroyed our country, and it can't possibly be revisited. And that bears no relation whatsoever to what I remember and to what I look back upon.
But the impact of 2 years of being almost entirely negative has to have an effect. I mean, the Project Fear, you know, if you have to continually tell somebody they can't do something, it affects you as well.
Yeah.
So I suppose when you were saying there about everybody out dancing and enjoying it, and it was a Jack McConnell's recollection that, well, I mean, what were they like then? I mean, which were they the ones out dancing? Were they the sort of uncivilized extremists, the 50%? And that's the language you're going to get now forever. You know, all these people that actually went out to go through a democratic process were extremists.
Yeah, I mean, when I look back, I remember at the time, you know, remember campaigning got suspended because Big Jim Murphy got egged. I mean, come on, they made it like that was some kind of terrorist attack on unionism or something.
God, yeah.
Egged.
A comment on that. They should have got that guy that threw the egg, arrested him and charged him for the crime of not using a brick.
He did get caught, arrested and charged. And nobody mentioned the wee guy up at Blackhall that got his shop turned in. The old boy in the high street that got attacked for singing. The lassies in George Square
Yeah,
that had
mind that.
flag and stuff pulled off them and were threatened. The fire down the lane off George Square that was set by unionists. None of that.
Yeah,
was
but you're not allowed to talk
at all.
about unionists, Norman. They won, so they can celebrate in a way that is absolutely commensurate with victory. They can do what they like. They can wave their butcher's apron in people's faces for the next, well, they thought it was going to be for the next 30 years because they'd won. And remember, look at how absolutely every single one of them, when you pull them up and ask them to explain the last 20 polls in a row, all they can go back to, all they can tell you is that the silent majority will once again win. It's a faith thing for some of them.
Why do we never poll the silent majority of unionists? Why do they never get asked for their opinion?
Well, apparently because all the polls are done by Angus Robertson. You know, it's no Setanta Comres, it's no Ipsos Mori, it's Angus Robertson. He's behind it all. That's what they seem to think.
I was just wondering.
I thought Norrie was having a bit of a laugh there. Nobody's asked the silent majority all this, you know. Well, if they're silent, you don't know where they are, you can't ask them.
I'm just going to remind everybody that the problem the reason we don't have a shared memory, cultural memory of the joyous side of the referendum in 2014 is the media.
Yeah.
The media we have doesn't allow, they've shaped our culture and they continue to do so.
Well, they've tried. The unfortunate thing for them is that things like AUOB came along and kept the joyousness on the streets because they put 100,000 people down the streets of Edinburgh. Not one arrest, not one problem. The police are dancing down the street with you because they realise, hold it, this is the biggest demo I'm ever going to work at. And it's a Gideon. There's no an issue here. These people may want something. They may want independence. They certainly didn't want to cause any trouble.
And it's important to point out that it was always disapproved of by the SNP headquarters. And the First Minister never appeared at any. The only rally she appeared at in recent years was one sponsored by the national newspaper.
Yeah.
I'd be honest with you, mate. When you look at the characters, that AUOB's become something far greater than the sum of its parts. Let's be honest, because you look at the characters behind it. I wouldn't want to appear on the podium with him.
Well, we'll see where that goes.
See, Jimmy,
I want to give a shout to Craig Murray before, in case we get
Right. I won't fill
run off.
the word then.
Sorry?
it was just that bit at the end. Jimmy was saying with the police were
Sorry?
with
Norrie was talking there. Sorry. What was he?
He asked
He was
Norrie?
trying to get Phil in.
Oh, right. Okay.
all right, okay. It was all under one banner, and the police going along, and the police enjoying it. I've seen that a load. I mean, point is, a lot of these policemen, when they get the chance, will do exactly what we'll do. They'll vote for independence because they want to continue to work for, well, as they call it, Police Scotland now, rather than if you stay in England or in Britain, you'll end up in G4S.
Do they not have to swear allegiance to the crown? And does that not mean you can't vote yes?
I wouldn't bank on too many
I don't think
police.
there's an oath of allegiance to be a police these days, is there?
I wouldn't bank on too many police voting left wing, to be honest. Traditionally, they are right wing.
What's independence got to do with being left wing?
Oh, well, there's a question. Stuart, you were going to move
Oh
on.
yes, I mean, let's bring up Craig Murray. This is Craig Murray is one of our warriors, independence warriors. Stands up for human rights. He backed Julian Assange. He reported from the Alex Salmond trial. He's reported from the Julian Assange trial, and now he's on trial himself, and it's clearly a political trial. Starts tomorrow. There's no jury, just a judge, because it's a contempt of court trial. His evidence has been refused to submit his evidence, apart from written evidence. We've no idea what's going to happen to him. He could face up to 2 years in jail and an unlimited fine. And I think it's really important that the world in Scotland knows all about Craig Murray and his problems.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think Craig is a strange character, but he has been very informative over the last few years as to what's going on. I would suggest that his article, the one that they're doing him for, may have gone close, very, very close to the edge. And I think he may actually be on a sugary peg with a couple of these things. But I would hope that even if some of that article is found to be contempt, I would hope that Lady Dorian sees common sense here, because we will see a sentencing, I think today, is it, of somebody
it's
who
2 days.
was.
I think it's supposed to be
in
2 days set aside.
No, I'm saying, but we'll see a sentencing, I think, today of somebody who was found in contempt last week. He admitted to it.
Oh, this is over in the guy from Rosyth.
The guy for Fife, aye.
Aye.
So it'll be interesting to see what sentence is imposed upon him, because he actually done it. So I'd hate to think that Craig Murray, because we all feel that this is a political witch hunt against Mr. Murray, I'd hate to think that Lady Dorian would impose a harsher sentence upon Craig for maybe, if she finds him in contempt, it's a contempt of a journalistic license. He didn't go out there to to commit contempt, which the boy for Fife did.
Well, that, I mean, the excuse that's been bandied about by the powers that be is it's almost as if we can trust journalists to commit contempt, but we can't trust bloggers to commit contempt. The reasons they gave for not going after the mainstream media journalists.
Which is interesting, given that Craig Murray's had a National Union of Journalists card for about 20 years.
Yeah, they definitely differentiate between people.
What about the possibility of him being not getting cleared and does he get turned into a martyr by the pro-Salmond supporters?
There'd be there would be protests, there would be appeals, there'd be protests. The legal
profession in Scotland, are they going to object? The journalists, are they going to object?
The journalists aren't going to object because he's not considered one of them. I do get a whiff of the martyr of Craig.
It's no point being a martyr unless you have an awful lot of followers. While he might be popular online and that, there's millions and millions of punters about who've never heard of it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I would imagine even if he's found guilty, he'll get a slap on the wrist because he didn't write a name down. It was just,
I think it's almost a cert he'll get found guilty, mate, because the British establishment have wanted to get him ever since he pointed out that they were involved in the extraordinary rendition of people from Afghanistan and Iraq. If it wasn't for Craig Murray, that story might not have come out.
Oh, they've been trying to get him for years, absolutely. I mean, after all, that's why he was sacked as an ambassador.
I have a little bit more faith in our judges.
Well,
more faith in what?
Our judges.
Yes, well, we'll see.
Aye, right.
Yeah, that's a thing, Norrie. You've I'd agree with you to that at that point. I think Lady Dorian is an interesting character, and a couple of judgments that I've seen have been they have been justice. You know, I would like to think that we can trust our judges, regardless of whether we can trust the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service. I'd like to think we can trust our judges, so I do hold out some hope.
The Craig Murray case might be the case that changes my mind.
Phil?
You're a fly bunch, judges, right? If they're sitting there and something comes up really controversial, but, you know, if they're sympathetic, you know, making themselves look liberal and good, but the decision doesn't have an adverse effect on them and their cronies, then they'll be magnanimous. Other than that, most of the time they'll just bite you up, lock you up, you know. Sorry to be cynical, but just read your history. I mean, the idea that justice comes out of British courts, the Old Bailey and all the rest of it. You figure out I come from an Irish community, on your bike. Are you Irish? Guilty. Are you black? Guilty. Are you Indian? Guilty. Oh, and soon it will be, are you Scots? Guilty.
What do you
That's
mean?
another one
Stu?
altogether.
What do you mean, Stu?
Oh, they haven't started yet, pal. They have.
You haven't started. Well, we're getting very close to the end of our time. Anybody is desperate to say something?
Yeah, I just want to point out, seeing we've not got to it, I'd like to point people in the direction of an article by Kirsty Hughes from the Scottish Centre on European Relations. It's a fabulous piece. You can find it on Twitter. You can find it online as well. And it's possibly, because it looks at the ideas of Scottish independence from both sides, it's well worth a read. It's possibly one of the best pieces I've read in the last few weeks.
Yep, she does point out that she points out the future of either option, a Scotland and England relationship within the Union or without the Union. And the article's titled "England's Scotland Panic: What is to be done?"
Okay.
How are you doing, guys? Shall we do? I think we can end there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And thanks, Jimmy Hutton, Phil Attridge, Norrie Stewart. My name's Stuart Lochhead. Speak to you again tomorrow.